Please pray with me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts draw us closer to you, our rock and redeemer. Amen. I have to admit, whenever I hear any text in the Bible say, "Follow me," I hear, "Follow, follow, 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 follow," from the Fantastics, or I hear, "I will follow you, I will follow wherever you go," which of course became a hit for the Sister Act crowd. But this is not what Jesus means at all about following. And you might say, how does this text also impact gay pride? LGBTQ plus, LGBTQIA plus pride, even if you don't even have a letter yet, pride. Which I like that as we get more and more letters, actually, it becomes more inclusive, but we get down to a fundamental truth that I think is inherent in pride, which is that no matter who you are, or where you are on life's journey, you are a beloved child of God. And we wouldn't need pride celebrations if everybody believed that. And so that's, or everybody, it's not just a matter of belief, although belief is really important, but it's also what your social circumstances are and what people believe about you. It's pretty hard to believe in yourself when other people call you the kinds of names that they have called LGBTQIA plus people over the years. Kind of hard. So in this text, this guy says, "I'll follow you anywhere you go," which sounds like, rock and roll groupie. And I think Jesus probably was that kind of phenomenon. People were like, "Oh, wow, this is so cool. I want to do whatever you're going to do." But Jesus knows already that his path is not an easy one. If you're taking on the principalities and powers, it's not going to go well. And so he tries to tell them in a way, or this is how Luke describes it, but I think there were many dialogues like this. I think lots of people said to Jesus, and this is what Luke is trying to emphasize, but I think they wanted to follow him. And as we know, the disciples were terrible at it. Even the people who did sign up and join his crazy roadshow were feckless at best. Maybe his mother was faithful the whole way, not sure. So this text, the first thing, of course, foxes have holes and the birds of the air have. So the first thing you have to know, and the meaning of that koan, and you can literally turn that into a koan. Foxes have holes, birds of the air have their nest, but we have nowhere that we actually live. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. It's an inside job. You cannot have your external circumstances tell you what home looks like. To mention Over the Rainbow, at the end, she goes through all those different things. Dorothy tries all these various things, but at the end, Glinda says, "But, my dear, you had the power to go home all along. Simply click your heels 3 times and there you'll be." We do have the power to be at home, But it's not easy. It's not simple. And Jesus has learned the Buddhist, holy man, take any religious tradition you want. He has learned how to be at home wherever he is, no matter what is happening. Even though he's in human form, he has learned how to do that. And I've met a few people who are able to do that. And some of what your answers are to the question about how to get things done even when you're completely overwhelmed. I mean, Dan, I love this. Just brick up. Brick up. Randy, ask for help. Bonnie, focus on water. Focus on the natural world. Let nature teach you. You're talking about water, but there are many other ways to go that same path. And these are all really great paths. And meditation can be the thing. You know, have a reflection. Sit yourself down early in the morning. And what is meditation? Meditation is visiting your own mind with the purpose of getting a little better, right? We all have different practices of what happens in the silence, but it's all some kind of way that we want to come to terms with the inner person. And so meditation is a regular way to do that. Whether it's going in early like Sylvia just to have a little talk with herself about specific things, but I expect other things besides work came through your brain too, right, Sylvia? She's nodding. Right? Because whenever we take time for reflection, whatever is really in the way will usually pop up. And when we see it, we can make a decision in our own mind what to do about that. And it might be just, oh, stop doing that. Or it might be more complicated. It might be, you know, I'm angry at so-and-so because I have not reconciled with them. Or, I mean, it could be anything, as we know. So the first thing he has is if you really want to follow the Jesus path, or any path you choose, including the coming out path. I don't think Julian Rush in 1985 wrote this hymn easily. Imagine in 1985, we are man, we are woman, all persuasions, young and old. He couldn't even say gay, really. All persuasions, right? He couldn't even really say that, even though everyone around him was dying. And I remember those days. That was when I was at the depth of the dying years at Houston Grand Opera and at the LA Opera. That's when everybody was dying so fast you hardly got to say goodbye. You'd hear they were sick and then they were gone. So you had to figure out how to be home even when that was happening. And follow your path. What we hear Julian saying is, God of rainbow, fiery pillar, lead us, I'm in a wilderness. And he used all the images of faith, the olive branches, the doves, all of that, to say, I'm going to stay on this path, even though the people in my own church, the people in the wider community can't say yes to me. There is no home. Because at that point, there was no home to be an openly gay minister. Even William R. Johnson, who was the first openly gay man ordained in the United Church of Christ in 1972, he would have said in 1985 he was barely at home. He was barely at home. It didn't mean just because the Golden Gate Association stepped up and said yes to Bill Johnson, it doesn't mean that the whole UCC was ready and the rest of the culture was sure not ready. They're still not ready. A lot of folks are not ready. I am not welcome in all pulpits, I can tell you that. First of all, I'm a woman. I used to love to preach in Catholic churches, and they used to love inviting me because there's so many Roman Catholics who would really love to have women priests, especially around here. And so the best they can do is a Protestant. They can invite somebody that they know won't get them in trouble. They can say, well, ecumenism. They can't invite a nun to preach. I've had my nun friends say, they can invite you, but not me. I've given my whole life to this church. But I'm not going to stand in that pulpit, but they'll let you stand, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. And I always, when I do that, I always call out the faithful women in the Roman Catholic Church. So I'm saying pride is not just about LGBTQ plus people, but it's about being all of who you are and being willing to acknowledge that. So he goes a little further. Guy says, you know, I got to bury my father. I've got these family obligations, which in that culture are even bigger than they are in this culture. I mean, it's big now, but the idea that you would actually step away from your family, Jesus says this over and over. Says this over and over. Who are your brothers and sisters? They're the people on the path with you. And that may or may not be your family. Well, again, queer folks know all about this. I am out to all of my family, but I was not out to my Uncle Leroy. And there was a part of me when he died that felt like I should have said something. I just put that in a generational kind of bubble. And I felt like it was my mother's job to tell him, not mine. And I did that with a lot of her friends. And some of you have heard me tell the story. At her memorial, one of her very good friends, when there was Colleen, I was out at her memorial. So a bunch of her friends realized I was a lesbian at her memorial. I didn't mean it to be a coming out moment, but she was dead. It was now my turn to tell her story and mine. I was not going to bow to her getting to tell the story for herself. And I found out how little she had told her friends about me. And her friend Sonny Collins, who is a raging Republican and now 101 years old, Sonny Collins said up, she said, well, why didn't you tell me? She was so angry with me, really angry, because she was a member of University Christian Church, and they were a reconciling congregation, and she was proud of that, and she was proud that I was a pastor, and she'd had me sing in her church because she really wanted me to sing in her church and stuff like that. Why didn't you tell me? I said, wasn't my story to tell. Well, why didn't she tell me? I said, I really don't know, Sonny. She says, I feel like I didn't know her. And I said, well, she knew me, and I'll just let you work that out what that meant. I don't know. I don't know. She was so angry, because she was already on the path of not only acceptance, but she wants to know. I recently watched the new documentary, which I highly recommend, about Sally Ride, the astronaut. Now, some of you know that her little sister Bear, who was named Bear because Sally couldn't say Karen and called her Bear. Bear Ride, yes, she's lived with this name her whole life. Bear Ride recruited me to seminary. Bear is a very good friend of mine, Presbyterian minister, that I knew in Los Angeles back in the day. I've known her for 40 years now. And I got to speak to Sally once on the phone when Bear was having a computer problem, and she says, well, let's just call Sally. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do a computer IT conversation with Sally Ride. And shockingly enough, she had a software solution and didn't want to solve the hardware problem. And I said to her, is that what you all always do in NASA? She said, yeah, we never fix the hardware problems. We just program around it. And I thought, this is before Challenger. I thought, that's interesting. Sally Ride, the documentary, some of you probably know that she was for 27 years in a relationship with a woman named Tam O'Shaughnessy. She was very much a lesbian. She was not out. And she didn't want to be out. She was a public figure. She didn't want to hurt NASA. She was a good friend of Billie Jean King's, and she saw what happened to Billie Jean King. She didn't want that trouble, in part because she was a very private person. Their whole family are Norwegians. And if you'd ever met Mother Ride, Joyce Ride, Joyce never talked about anything. And in the documentary, Sally's partner, who was welcome to family gatherings, it's like they all knew it, but they didn't talk about it. She said, we would arrive at the house, and she said, you know, if you went to my family's house, and they hadn't seen you in a little while, there's, hey, good to see you, hugs, whatever. She would open the door and say, hey, Sally, hey, Tam, and she'd go back to whatever she was doing, and you just walked in, and you just either joined her in what she was doing, but she says she didn't talk about anything. There was no affection, there was none of that. Norwegian buttoned up. And Bear says, you know, as a pastor, she had to learn how to get rid of that. But as an engineer, Dan, Sally never got over being a Norwegian just about the business. No personal anything. And that was pretty much true, according to the documentary, for most astronauts and a lot of physics. So she found the right crowd for her. They didn't talk about personal things, even though being an astronaut, they asked you an unbelievable number of questions and put you through a huge number of tests, and yet somehow never figured this out. Isn't that fascinating? She kept this secret until she died at the age of 57, which of course was way too young. But towards the end of her life, literally as she was dying, she told Bear, she told Mother Ride, she told Tam, she said, she wouldn't really talk about dying, but she said, say whatever you want about me. My story is now your story. And when you're Sally Ride, you've got a story that actually is, well, literally trademarked. You know, if they make a Sally Ride action figure, the family gets money. Right? So she's literally, her image, her everything is trademarked. They said, you now, it's yours. And Bear told me, she said, Tam and I had a conversation and we realized we should just put it in the obituary. Lynn Scher, who had been Sally Ride's biographer, talked about how angry she was to read it in the obituary, and she didn't know. She'd written a whole book about the woman and didn't know. Didn't know. And she said, my first thought was, why didn't she tell me? So angry. So angry. And then she said, I thought, wow, to hold that secret all those years, what was that like? And she said, and then she said, I cried all over again because it felt like she died twice. The person I knew died, and then the person I never knew died again. She said, I lost her twice in the obituary. And the obituary was not pointed, it just at the end said, is survived by. And everybody started Googling, who is this person? And found out it wasn't a man. Of course, they also used the term life partner, which was also kind of a dead giveaway. Even in 2012, because we didn't have marriage equality. They couldn't marry. They might have, and she might have come out, but pancreatic cancer took her first. So the Jesus path means you have to let go of all external things that keep you from being exactly the beloved child you are. And that's difficult. I think everybody needs to come out as whoever you are. And it's not about sexuality. I wish they would focus on anything but sexuality. Frankly, it's a small part of most people's lives, especially the older we get. Right? It's like, okay, yeah, what really makes a long-term marriage is friendship, and, it's not about what sex was when you were much younger. That's not the most important thing. I say, having been married for a fair amount of time myself. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm just saying it's not the only thing. In fact, if it is the only thing, you're not going to last 25 years or 45 years or 50 years or whatever. Exactly. You're just not going to, because it's so much more than that, what relationships are, and also what being on the path is. Talk to me about your moral values. Talk to me about that. Don't talk to me about your sex life. I don't care. And why do people care? I mean, really, why do they care about that? I just don't understand, and I will never understand why anybody thinks who you might be attracted to, who you're in a relationship with, should make you either good or bad. That's just nuts. Show me the quality of your relationships. Show me your moral fiber. Show me how you are in community. Show me those things. And that's the Jesus path. Don't worry about the family. Don't worry about how other people define you. So this idea of following is, oddly enough, learning to follow yourself. The holiest part inside you. The part that knows that peace is the path. The part that knows that love is the path. The part that knows deep down within that we are here to build, not destroy. That we are here to get along and to collaborate, not push away and hate. The part that knows, and I love this, Bonnie, this little extra piece about the watering, the part that's here to foment resilience. Because plants aren't the only thing that thrive when they have a consistent knowledge that they will be fed and cared for. People are exactly like that too. And animals. You know, now we don't do this, but if we forgot to feed Tasia some night, she might wonder whether or not she was in trouble. Right? And I watch her, she's a lot like a toddler in some ways. If we don't keep the schedule, she gets nervous. And she feeds that back to us immediately. We are all in need of consistent care we can count on. And sometimes if the schedule isn't good, or if things aren't predictable, then we need trust. And that's the same thing in our spiritual lives. We have to trust in the holy even when the holy's path is not clear. That the path will appear. So yesterday during the thought experiment, Wendy Beckerman, who is an amazing spiritual teacher, mostly in Buddhist circles, but also has a new album, and she's on our community advisory board. Anyway, she said to me, after we'd figured out it was August 15th and I was sort of sitting there feeling sad, she said, maybe you can hear this, maybe you can't. That's how wise she is. She said, but sometimes I don't want to say things happen for a reason, but trust the timing. She said, my last album should have been out, in my mind, a year ago. But things kept happening, various things. And she said, it was very frustrating for me, but it came out when it was supposed to come out, which is right now. And she said, this may not feel like the time you wanted. And she said, I know it's not the time you wanted. You wanted this 2 years ago. But trust the timing. And she's not a person who believes in an interventionist God. So she's not, this is God's plan. She's not that. She's just saying, learn to trust when things don't happen the way you think they ought to. And especially if you think, well, it's partly my fault. We feel guilty. I'm just here to tell you, Colleen and I often feel very guilty. And we do a lot of this kind of, if only we had, or woulda, coulda, shoulda. And then we stop each other and say, well, we did the best we could. We keep trying to take each other off that hook, but this project has been so complicated and we've made enough mistakes that it's just hard. There's days when we just feel really bad about it, that we couldn't figure out how to do it better, faster, better, And this is me just being completely transparent. And because this is going to sit on YouTube, that's my lesson from this. You're going to make mistakes in life. But if you dwell on them, you'll stop living. Like James Baldwin said, this is the life you have. You have to live it. You don't get another life. I occasionally like the thought experiment of, well, if I'd stayed in opera, would I have written 10 librettos by now? Or some of you know I originally really wanted to be an opera conductor, but back in 1984, I couldn't find a path. I couldn't find anybody who would teach me. The conducting professor at Rice did not want women in his classes. In 1984, it was not easy for me to fight that. Even now, look at a conducting podium. You don't see many women on those podiums, and there's reasons for that. That's why every time Eun-Sun Kim at the San Francisco Opera, and because a lot of people don't know gender in Korean, not everybody realizes she's a woman until this tiny little woman walks out and then just knocks it out of the park because she's fantastic. But we scream and yell every time because we just never see women on the podium. And I had that dream. And sometimes I think, what if? But I was supposed to do this. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So she says, trust the timing. I'm going to do my best to trust. So my invitation this week is kind of like the ultimate invitation, which is be willing to be on the path. Be willing to stay with it even when it's hard. Use all your spiritual practices, meditate, ask for help, look to nature, reflection, meditation, all those things. Try to live in this moment. Try to be strong like Dan in his brick house. Try to do your best. Because what we get from it is we become the people that others look to. And this world needs people who show what a path of peace and a path of love looks like. What a path that is clearly demonstrating that everyone is a beloved child of God. Even you, even me, even you, even me, even you, even me, even all the people in San Francisco, all the people in the farmers market, all the people driving down Valley View, just minding their own business, they are beloved children of God. May we treat each other